Hello again, year sevens. I hope that you are well. In today's lesson, our aim is to understand how we inherit different characteristics. Soon, you will understand what that word means. Our first task is to complete the retrieval questions. Please pause the video and attempt these now. This is a diagram of an animal cell. So, A is where the cell membrane is. This is the flexible covering of the cell that keeps unwanted substances out and allows essential nutrients in. B is the nucleus. This is the control center of the cell. And C is the cytoplasm, which is the jelly-like substance where chemical reactions happen. Number 2 says, what is found inside structure B? That would be the DNA or chromosomes, where we get genetic information. Number 3 states, what are the two specialized cells which are involved in sexual reproduction? That would be the egg and sperm cells. And finally, number 4, what is sexual reproduction? When a male and female mate, egg and sperm fuse together. Our success criteria in today's lesson is to know what is meant by characteristics, to know what inherited variation means, and to understand how we inherit different characteristics. Our next task is to define and explain in our own words what characteristics means. You may want to use Bart Simpson to help you out. Think about his physical attributes. You may have noted that he's a boy. He has yellow skin and hair, golf ball eyes, a bit of a pot belly, and his head is a disproportionate size to his mouth and ears. So, physical characteristics are defining traits or features about your body. These are aspects that are visually apparent. So what characteristics do Mr. Sneeze and Mr. Strong have? Mr. Sneeze, for instance, has blue skin, long legs, red nose, and star-like face. Whereas Mr. Strong, on the other hand, has a square face which makes up the bulk of his body and stocky legs. He has hands, whereas Mr. Sneeze doesn't. So, what if Miss Trouble and Mr. Sneeze were to have a child? She has inherited Miss Trouble's face and shape and hands and Mr. Squeeze's nose and legs. These are known as inherited characteristics. What if these two characters were to have a child? Please pause the video and imagine what this child could look like now. So inherited variation is a combination of different characteristics which you can inherit from your mother and from your father. But how do we get these characteristics from our parents? In order to answer that question, we need to think about the role of DNA. DNA is the shortened version of deoxyribonucleic acid, which carries the genetic code that determines characteristics of a living organism. Chromosomes are thin strands of DNA and they're subdivided into genes. Humans have 46 chromosomes arranged in 23 pairs. So mom and dad have 23 pairs of chromosomes. They inherited one from each of their parents. Here is one of their parts. That's mom and that's dad. To make the next generation, DNA is mixed for genetic diversity during meiosis. This is a type of cell division, and each mixed up chromosome goes into its own cell. The next generation gets one chromosome from each parent. The baby has its own unique combination of its parents' DNA. A gene is a small section of DNA that is usually located on a chromosome and controls the development of one or more traits. It is the basic unit by which genetic information is passed from parent to offspring. For instance, if you have the gene for tongue rolling, you will be able to roll your tongue. Why not have a go at doing this now? Here is a Hinge question for you. Please pause the video and decide which statements are correct. A says genes code for certain characteristics. You get all of your genes from your mother. And C, your accent is inherited. And D, inherited variation occurs because of sexual reproduction. The correct response would be A and D. Variation can be measured. If you were to ask somebody about their eye colors, for instance, there are only a limited number of responses that they could give. They could say they were hazel or blue or green and brown and perhaps a couple more. This means that the answers are particular categories and there cannot be any answers outside of these. So we use a tally chart or a frequency table, and we can record the number of times a particular value occurs in a set data. For our data, we have different eye color. We've got brown, we've got blue, and we've got green. And we have recorded that there were 2 people with brown eye color, 3 with blue, and 4 with green. So we are going to plot these numbers on a bar graph. So a bar graph is used because this is an example of what's called discrete variation, because it has a limited number of possibilities as opposed to what's known as continuous variation. You could have a go at looking up those words. So step 1 is to decide which variable goes along the x-axis, which is the bottom, and which goes along the y-axis, which is the side. Or independent variable goes along the x-axis, which is the bottom, your independent variable is one of the factors that the experimenter can control. The dependent variable changes in response to the independent variable. So step 2 is to decide how big your graph needs to be. First, look at how long the x-axis needs to be. In this case, there are 3 categories. Then look at how big the y-axis needs to be. In this case, it goes up to 4. So then you choose a scale for the y-axis. Are you going to go up in intervals of 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, etc.? And then step 3 is to decide how wide you want your bars to be. I would choose them to be 5 little squares wide, but it's up to you. Each bar must be the same width. Step 5 is to add your axes. We've got number of people on one side and we've got eye color on the other side. So then we draw our bars. So we've got 2 people with brown eyes, 3 people with blue eyes, and 4 people with green eyes. So if we had a success criteria for using a bar chart, or for drawing a bar chart, we'd want to use a pencil to draw a graph, use a ruler to draw the graph, title explaining what the graph shows, and correct labels on each axis, and ensure that all our scale is correct scale used by the y-axis. Key points from this lesson I've learned what inherited variations are. I've learned that inherited variations are different characteristics inherited from our parents, and that inherited variation occurs when we get different genes from different parents, and that we can represent variation of a characteristic using a bar chart. So, finally, Year 7s, think of a question you'd like to ask your teacher on this topic, inherited variation, and it must be a question that has not been covered in class. For instance, why do you not look identical to your mother, father, brother, sister, etc.? Try use these keywords: characteristics, genes, and variation, and then you can email your teacher with that question. Fantastic listening, Year 7s. Well done.